Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Garbo Hearn, and I am the director of Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing located in Little Rock, Arkansas. This past June, we celebrated 33 years of promoting African-American art and literature in the Central Arkansas community. So if you're ever in Little Rock, please drop by our location. We're located in the historical Dunbar neighborhood, and you can also shop with us online at www.pyramid1988, 24 hours a day. Today, our focus is on literacy, and we're doing the book launch for People Power, which features contributions from leading scholar activists. People Power demonstrates how the lessons of history can inform the building of new social justice movements today. This volume is inspired by the path-breaking life and work of writer, activist, and historian Lawrence Larry Goodwyn. As a radical Texas journalist and a political organizer, Goodwyn participated in historic changes ushered in by grassroots activism in the 1950s and 60s. Professor and co-founder of the Oral History program at Duke University, Goodwyn wrote about movements built by Latino farm workers, Polish trade unionists, civil rights activists, and others who challenged the status quo. People Power will generate discussions about the potential of democracy and the multiple crises of our time. Today, we are honored to have People Power editors Wesley Hogan and Paul Ortiz. They are here to help answer the question, what motivates ordinary people to move from kitchen table conversations to civic engagements? After our welcome from Lenore Marshall, Vice President of Elaine Legacy Center, the next voice you'll hear will be Paul Ortiz. He's a PEN Award-winning author. His books include An African American and Latinx History of the United States and Emancipation Betrayed, The Hidden History of Black Organizing and White Violence in Florida from Reconstruction to the Bloody Election of 1920. He is the director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and professor of history at the University of Florida. In 1993, Paul's undergraduate advisor, Stephanie Kuntz, sent him off to Duke University to study with Bill Chafe and Larry Goodwyn. And the rest, as they say, is history. So welcome, Lenore Marshall and Wesley Hogan and Paul Ortiz. Thank you for being here. And after the presentation, we will have a Q&A with the authors, so make sure you put your questions in the chat room. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Greetings to all of you noble ones. Today, we're delighted to extend a hearty welcome to all of our guests and supporters. Welcome to Elaine and to the Elaine Legacy Center. We also welcome our wonderful guests by means of Zoom. We also welcome and are very glad to have Dr. Paul Ortiz with us today. A super special warm welcome to Julia Wright, the daughter of the late Richard Wright. Each of you are welcome. You're welcome as the flowers that bloom in the spring. You're welcome as the orchards where the bluebirds sing. You're welcome as the queen in the presence of her king. The Elaine Legacy Center, certainly with joy, welcome you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marshall, and just a really warm welcome, just echoing what Ms. Marshall and Garbo, and I'm just so thrilled to be here. My name, if you just logged in, is Paul Ortiz, and I just wanted to explain briefly where I'm coming from, where I'm at now, the amazing Elaine Legacy Center. I just think that Larry Goodwyn would have been so thrilled that the book launch we're doing today as a community, as a town hall, as an organizing activity is at the Elaine Legacy Center and is sponsored by Pyramid Books. And by the way, you see that beautiful bookshelf behind Garbo Hearn, our main sponsor today. Please encourage colleagues and friends to purchase the book from Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing, they are kindly offering free shipping, if I understand that correctly, free shipments. And I promised Garbo not to mention that the evil corporation that also sells books, but please buy your book directly from Pyramid Art and Books. But again, the Elaine Legacy Center, so Garbo and Wes and I are in 3 different places, and we're in 100 different places, right, Wes? This is kind of what it means to do these types of events in the era of the global pandemic. But the Elaine Legacy Center is a community-based organization that does so many things. It's the headquarters, the Head Start program, there's vaccinations done here. Kids are here every day getting free meals, learning arts and crafts, doing really productive activities in the summer. But underlying all of this at the foundation, the work that people like Mrs. Marshall and Dr. Mary Olson and James White do is to try to commemorate and highlight and illuminate the histories and the legacies of the 1919 Elaine massacre. And this was one of the many topics that Wes and I learned about from Larry Goodwyn. And to be here to talk to descendants of the Elaine massacre is really a humbling experience. And I think really it's what Larry's legacy is all about. And I also do want to acknowledge the presence of Julie Wright, who did one of the last major book events at Pyramid Art and Books, bringing out Richard Wright's long lost, amazing book. And right now, so it's my great privilege to introduce my dear friend, colleague, mentor, guide, fellow traveler of many years, Wesley Hogan. As many of you know, Wes and I actually entered grad school together at Duke in the fall of 1993. And as Garbo mentioned, my undergraduate mentor, Stephanie Coons, insisted that I go to Duke. But Wes and I really had a lot of exciting experiences in graduate school. A lot of them intersected with Larry Goodwyn. Some of them we might share today. Others we may probably more appropriately share them over a glass of beer at some time when we get back together in person. But Wes's kind of formal introduction, and she has an incredible academic and organizing career. And I can just touch on a little bit of it. I could talk all day about her incredible career, but she is currently a research professor at the Franklin Humanities Institute in History. Between 2003 and 2013, she taught at Virginia State University, where she worked with the Algebra Project and Young People's Project. And between 2013 and 2021, she served as director of the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University. She has written a number of books and essays. Her most recent book is titled On the Freedom Side. It draws a portrait of young people organizing in the spirit of Ella Baker since 1960. She also co-facilitates a partnership between the SNCC Legacy Project, Duke, the SNCC Digital Gateway, whose purpose is to bring the grassroots stories of the civil rights movement to a much wider public through a web portal, K-12 initiative, and a set of critical oral history. So please join me in welcoming the brilliant Dr. Wes Hogan.
Hey, Paul. Hey, everybody. It's so good to be with you all today. It's so great to see so many faces familiar. And I just want to thank you all so much. I bring greetings from Washington, D.C., where it is a sweltering day, but I'm coming from the offices of Teaching for Change and the Zen Education Project, which serves about 100,000 teachers who work to share the story of grassroots activism with young people in K-12 schools today across the country. And so we're running this workshop with 30 teachers during July on how to bring the story of the grassroots civil rights movement, including that in Arkansas that has been led by Black youth and Black women, to the teachers who teach our young people. So it's a delight to step out of that for a little bit this afternoon and join you all to celebrate this book launch. I want to thank Garbo Hearn and Pyramid. We're so excited to be here with you all today. And I want to thank also the people who've been working so hard in Elaine over the past half century to clarify and amplify the story of the freedom movement in Elaine, and the work of Miss Marshall and the Elaine Legacy Center we're so grateful to be gathered with you all today as well. I want to say that this book started as a far off dream. In 2013, we were gathered together to celebrate Larry Goodwyn's long life as an organizer, as a journalist, as a historian, and general troublemaker. And people kept saying, we got to gather all of this incredible wisdom that he shared with us. And he never let us off easy. He was always talking about how we have to continue to get better. And so, I had just started this big job at Duke, and Paul was doing this incredible work at Florida. And we just thought, oh my gosh, how can we add this to the pile of things that we're doing? But the passion and the clarity of our fellow contributors just pushed us forward. And so I want to thank in particular the Goodwyn family, Wade Goodwyn, who's here with us here today. Thank you so much, Wade. Lauren Goodwyn, and of course, Larry's partner, decades-long partner, Nell Goodwyn. We could not have done this project without you all and your all support. So thank you so much, Wade, for being here with us today. I also want to thank the many contributors who are here. So I see you, Ms. Kithcart. Thank you so much for joining, Ms. Jacobs. I see you, Dr. Chafe, all these wonderful people who are with us here today, who contributed to the book. We went through many revisions. And I want to also thank the fearless editorial leadership of the University of Press of Florida under Sean Hunter. Those are all people that got us here today in the room. But the bottom line of this book is that it really arms people to work together despite all of our many human flaws, so we can, quote, put the jam on the lower shelf where the little guy can reach it. That was what Larry said to us so many times. We need to figure out how we can organize. And so this book takes a look at banking. It makes it understandable. It looks at race and makes it plain. It looks at politics and tries to figure out what's been happening the last 7 decades. And it takes a solid look at the freedom movements of the 20th century. And we even go into the first 2 decades of this cramped and yearning century that we're in. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Larry himself and read a short excerpt of how he interacted with me. And then I'm going to pass the mic back to Paul. And I'm just encouraging those of you who are here, like Ms. Kithcart, Ms. Jacobs, Bill, if there's some excerpts that you would like to share in the Q&A, it would be my great honor if you would be willing to do that today. So Larry, after a decade of reporting on the politics and sports worlds in Austin, he'd been across Texas in the 50s, he found his way to Jacksboro, Texas, and the offices of the Rural Citizen, which was going strong 100 years after populism, and it was staffed completely by women. And they had every back issue of the Rural Citizen going back to the very first days of the Farmers Alliance in the 1870s. And these women opened up the doors and let Larry sit there and read the newspapers from the beginning to the end, day after day. And what he read about, to his great astonishment, was the creation of these farmers alliances in Montague County and the emergence of an activist wing of that populist farmers alliance. And, this was completely unknown history to anyone in mainstream or marginalized history. And so he realized that he had stumbled onto an archive, and he always emphasized to us that it was maintained by women, that had kept alive this tradition of struggle in Montague County. And so this began the seeds of his big work, his best known work. In its shorter version, it's The Populist Moment, and its more extensive version, Democratic Promise, published in the 70s, where he really put forward this strong idea that revolutionized historians for generations through to the present, to say that people's movements don't spring up out of nowhere, right? We often hear them talked about in the media as if they're like a thunderstorm or a tsunami. And that was, he was saying, no, you can see it, you can trace it. They have generations of precursors. And that's why we have to talk to our kids about them as such. And our media makers, our journalists, our filmmakers. sidebar, you can see this in the most recent movie about Fred Hampton, Judas and the Black Messiah. So it's a wonderful trying to lift up of the story of this tremendous organizer, Fred Hampton, but the filmmakers don't necessarily know how to organize. And so that part about how do we teach our young people to actually organize for change that they want to see in their community is just kind of missing from the film. But Larry set out to change all that. He said, we need to make sure we teach young people, first teach ourselves and then teach young people how movements actually get built over multiple generations. So whether it's our current situation or the situation he illuminated in Poland or what's happening now in Burma, he said we have to be able to see movements and understand them as longer traditions of resistance. And I love, Wade might be able to jump in here later in the Q&A and correct me on this, but Larry's father, Wade's grandfather, always used to say to Larry that white Southerners acted the way they did because they didn't know any better. And I would argue that all of us do that, right? We all act the way we do because we don't know any better. And so having the ability to look at democratic promise and reset how we write history of social movements, it also provided a potential, I would say a potential because I haven't seen it in too many economists' thought, but it provided the potential for resetting how economists understood economic theory. Larry worked with a very prominent Duke economist on one of the appendices for that book to show that the Farmers Alliance sub-treasury idea for making banking democratic would have absolutely worked in the 1890s, but the banks killed it. And some version of it could easily work today. So he kind of recovered this idea of the sub-treasury plan so people could take a look at it in the 1970s and gave economists a way to understand small d democratic banking. And he provided a framework for understanding populist economic theories. And so the central problem of the farmers in the 1870s and 80s was not that different from people's indebtedness today, whether it's student debt or homeowners debt. But for farmers in the 1870s and 1880s, they were basically doing all this hard, sweaty work and extorted by people in cities far from their labor. So railroads, commodities markets, futures markets, sometimes closer to home, like elevator and warehouse operators, and of course, monetary deflation policies. And so he really taught us to see how these things would hold ordinary people down, right? Where they literally could not get the jam off the low shelf because there wasn't any jam to be had. It was all up on the high shelf. And so in the process of lifting that up for us to inspect, he also said, you know, race is not an incidental factor. It's a central through line in American history and politics. And if we fail to confront that reality, it costs us our democracy. And so we're seeing this again in our own historical moment. Larry would say this in the context of, by embracing the lost cause, white Southerners renounced their capacity for critical reflection after the Civil War. We see a lot of white Southerners and Northerners doing that today, where they're renouncing their capacity for critical reflection, just in these 26 laws that have passed into states to prevent critical race theory from being taught in the schools, right? But that the central plot of US history, Larry often contended, was that political and economic elites just use racism to strategically divide and conquer and break apart class-based solidarity among Black and brown and white people. And they do that for one simple reason: they want to hoard their money and their power. So there's so many people who have commented on this clarity of his teachings in their essays. I just want to note several things. That was Adam Leos had just pulled that line out that I just shared with you. But Faulkner Fox noted something that I think was actually really important about Larry too. He never put himself up on the high shelf either. He always allowed us to see him as a fully flawed human being. And so Faulkner writes, just because Larry understood male privilege didn't mean he didn't invoke it and inhabit it completely time and again, right? So he figured out how to, first by showing it in relationship to himself, and then he allowed us to be fully human and recognize our own flaws of white supremacy, homophobia, classism, and figure out how to do better and get up tomorrow and fight more justly with one another in solidarity. So we've brought together in this collection people deeply influenced by Goodwyn to reflect on this singular moment that we're in the 21st century with its absurd and unsustainable inequalities and its betrayal of the American ideal, particularly at the moment we are in now, one person, one vote. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from my essay in the book about a part of Goodwyn's legacy that hasn't been available for the public since he passed. And that is how he trained a whole younger generation of activists and scholars to ask what he called unsanctioned questions, questions that people are usually too afraid to ask. And what he did for me and so many others was he taught us how to ask questions or interview elders in the freedom struggle. And in so doing, one of the things that happened for us was we got to become part of a multi-generational movement. So I'm going to switch over to, this is just a short, it's like a page and a half excerpt from my essay where I'm talking about how he teaches us to ask these unsanctioned questions. So you got to get into the room with me. I'm interviewing in California, in Oakland, 3 people that people called movement heavies from the 60s. So these are people who, I'm 25 and I have no experience. And these are people who are in their 50s and have lived through the tumultuous 1960s as really incredible, sort of legendary organizers. I frequently liked the people I was interviewing. Oftentimes I deeply respected them. I saw them as movement elders, people who had carved out a meaningful life on their own terms. Larry took this reality gently and held it up for me to inspect without mercy. A good interview is not one you enjoy or good because you admire the person, he said. The value of an interview stands or falls on its concreteness. After reading this sentence many times, I looked back and realized that most of my questions as a 23, 24-year-old had not aimed at evidence collection about a movement per se. Instead, they had this subtext that I didn't see. I wanted to know how these organizers had moved through the world since I was looking for my place within it. It meant that too often my interview questions were geared toward exploring something for myself or trying to prove something to my interviewees, like how smart I was or how much I knew, how good my politics were, how worthy I was of being in their world. This was all a massive detour. It kept me away from getting to the research details I needed to understand the dynamics among those who made up the base of the social movement. When I focused on the interviewees' concrete experiences, all that ego-based questioning fell away. It immediately moved the interview beyond the shallows. This approach, centered on the interviewee's specific experiences, evolving over time, also kept me grounded and focused when I interviewed someone I did not particularly admire. Several movement vets struggled with arrogance, resentments. In hindsight, I can see such responses as all too understandable in light of the backlash politics dominating the 1980s and 1990s. At the time, I simply found their responses ugly. Often the gap between what they professed to value and what they practiced in their lives was too wide for me to pass over. When one person's life presented contradictions of a very deep nature, I gathered as much loose change as the floor of the car allowed and phoned Larry from a payphone in Oakland. What the F do I do with this? This person just tried to blow up multiple buildings and claims it was all a quest for justice in response to that napalmed photo of Phan Thi Kim Phuc at 9 years old, running down the road. How can I unpack that for any reader? We start again at 10 tomorrow morning. And I remember this so well, sitting there in a phone booth, sweating, and he just calmly responded, darling, that's no problem. You just start up and be yourself, warm and open, and then say, some people's lives kick up contradictions. You, sir, have lived such a life, and I'd like you to run some of them through your mind again and tell me what you come up with. And so he'd go on like that, and he just shared, moment after moment with me until if I interviewed people and drove insistently toward understanding how their experiences pushed them to new concrete moments of understanding, I could trace their initial reasons for joining the movement, and I could trace the movement all the way through. And so this was just such a powerful example that he shared time and again with those of us who he taught how to ask these unsanctioned questions and sit and listen deeply to the answer. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to my wonderful, treasured, and so colleague I'm unbelievably grateful for, Paul Ortiz.
All right. Thank you so much, Wes. We had, while you were talking, we had a bit of an outage here, but that's what and we're all back on from the Elaine Legacy Center. And so what I wanted to do is really just kind of echo what Wes did and read just a couple of brief passages from the introduction that are really written in the spirit of Larry Goodwyn. And just to really kind of let you know, Larry and Bill Chafe, of course, co-founded the Duke Oral History program, which really was the thing that brought not just the two of us to graduate school, but so many people. And Bill was the director or on the board of directors with Ray Gabbins and Bob Forstad for a project that actually funded me as a younger oral historian. It was called Behind the Veil, Documenting African-American Life in the Jim Crow South. And one of the fieldwork sites that we worked in for an amazing month in the summer of 1995 was in the Arkansas Delta, actually near Brinkley, near Phillips County, where I'm speaking to you live from now. And it was really that oral history background that pushed me to stay in academia, to realize that we could combine activism and organizing with rigorous scholarship and talking about how to change this country and really how to turn things around. And Larry was the person who taught you that you didn't have to do either or, right? He was very cantankerous. And I want to talk about that in a few minutes, just to echo some of the points that Wes made. But my students are right now, even as we speak, doing oral history interviews in the Arkansas Delta. And what I try to do as an instructor is essentially to do exactly what Larry Goodwyn and people like Bill Chafe and Ray Gabbins, did for me, which is to allow us to leave the campus or to more accurately to connect the campus with the broader community, to see learning as reciprocal, to understand that we don't have all the answers. In fact, we don't even have most of the answers as so-called educated middle-class people. There's so many things I love about Larry Goodwyn. One of them is that he was confusing at first. As a first-generation college student, person of color, going into academia was confusing for me. But almost the very first thing Larry told me, Larry, as you know, if you knew him, loved to be provocative. But almost the first thing, and Wes, if I'm recalling correctly, and of course memory can be tricky, right? Almost the first thing he told me, he walks up to me in the hallway of the Duke History Department and says, "Hello, I'm Larry Goodwyn, and I'm a white racist." And I was like, what? No one has ever introduced themselves to me as a white racist. But that's one of the things I really appreciated about Larry was his candor and his honesty. And if you took a seminar with him, as Wes said, you really understood quickly the importance and the power and the terrible tragedies that racism have driven this country into. And Larry wanted to make sure that we understood that racism was alive and well. He wanted to make sure that we understood that academics in most cases haven't gotten it right yet about the terrible distorting power of racism and white supremacy in this country. I also wanted to talk about the journey, the pathway of making this book a reality. And even though it's a collaborative effort, and we acknowledge a lot of people in the acknowledgements, and many of you here, family of Larry's and friends and comrades, but I do want to give major props to Wes, because she really was the person who, I think Wes, it was during maybe the 2013 or 2014 Oral History Association annual meeting, we sat down and we talked about this idea. And Wes was really the engine for making that happen. However, it wasn't an easy journey, because a lot of publishers that we approached I won't name names, but I actually invited someone to this meeting. A lot of the publishers said, well, we don't really publish festschrifts. And festschrift, of course, means a celebration, kind of a hagiography of a scholar. And we said, this is not a festschrift. This is not just a celebration. Sure, we want to celebrate Larry because he was a remarkable scholar and one of the great activist intellectuals, I think, in this country's history. But we also want to be critical, to echo what Wes said. And you'll see a lot of critical things in this book about Larry Goodwyn. It's not, oh, he was the best thing since sliced bread. If we did that, he would have frowned on it and he would not have liked it at all. The other thing I want to mention, Wes, I didn't know if you had the chance, you were the one who also pointed this out to me. This would have been Larry's 93rd birthday. And so we also wanted to kind of give a shout out to the family. Larry also was very hard on the historical profession. And a lot of his colleagues, I know, kind of looked at him sideways because of that. But, as a graduate student, that was very liberating. I think what Larry was trying to tell us was that we had a lot of work to do in the history profession, especially in terms of teaching social movements. And that was something that we often argued over. Larry hated when you agree with him as a student, actually. I remember one time he said, he would say, he was saying things, he was giving a lecture on something and everyone was kind of nodding their heads. And he just got disgusted. He said, I'm just going to leave. There's no reason for me to be here. Because he felt the point of education was disputation, dialogue, disagreement, debate, right? And the last personal memory I'll share of Larry before I read a couple of short passages is that I remember many of us, I would go to see him as much as I could, even though my first teaching job was at UC Santa Cruz, all the way across in the West Coast. And actually, my wife, Sheila Payne, who many of you know who's on the call now, we actually invited Larry to come out my first year as a junior professor, and we spent a whole week at UC Santa Cruz giving lectures. And my dear colleague, David Brundage, who's on the call today, remembers Larry's visit, I'm sure very fondly. And Larry shook things up as we could do. But I always felt bad because I really wore him out. I was so excited that he was on campus at UC Santa Cruz. I made him give talks, like 3 or 4 talks a day. And I think by the end of it, he was exhausted. So you can kind of tell now I'm kind of exhausted doing all this field work in Arkansas, right? So, payback, at a certain point. I want to read a couple brief passages from the introduction. And Wes and I, in writing this introduction, went through many revisions, but we tried to really write in the spirit of Larry Goodwyn and to think about, again, how history is integral to the study of social movements, historical memory, and social justice and organizing. And this is from the very beginning. And Wes, I want to make sure you didn't read in the very beginning of the introduction because okay, very good. Okay, so as we put the finishing touches on this book, millions of people worldwide took to the streets, inspired by the Black Lives Matter democracy movement. The 2020 protests were initially sparked by the police murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Organizers used picket signs, storytelling, social media, graffiti, oral history, and audio podcasts in order to force the nation to face up to the pervasive nature of racist violence in American society, past and present. While urging us all to remember the names and lives of African Americans killed by state violence, the protests have helped to rekindle movements against state violence in countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. This popular insurgency has been a long time in the making. Organizers in the movement for Black Lives have been working for years to build awareness of systemic racism while participating in a variety of coalitions, including immigration reform, prison abolition, gender and LGBT plus equity, and an end to U.S. imperialism. And these were all things that Larry Goodwyn cared deeply. He wanted us to connect imperialism to domestic racism, to homophobia, to all these things. He didn't always live up to the standards he set, but he tried to get us to think about those things. So this organizing work has been especially strong in the South. Black, Latinx, and Arab youth built the Florida-based Dream Defenders in the immediate wake of the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012. Subsequently, the group joined efforts across the state in promoting the Fight for 15 and a union campaign, as well as building solidarity with the Palestinians and garnering signatures for a petition to restore voting rights to formerly convicted felons in Florida. Lawrence Goodwyn, 1928 to 2013, would have loved this moment. Goodwyn was an activist, a professor, and a historian who wrote and lectured on social movements built by Texas farmers, Polish trade unionists, civil rights activists, Latino farm workers, and others who challenged the status quo. As a radical journalist and political organizer in Texas, Mississippi, Florida, and other states,
Hey, everybody. Thanks for your patience with the technical challenges we're facing. I'm going to just see if there are some folks who might be willing to share some of their pieces. Oh, Paul, I see you back. Okay. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but is there somebody who would like to share a little bit? Bill? Hey, Bill, it's not letting me unmute you, so I don't know if our hosts can unmute you. Garbo, are you able to unmute folks?
Wes, while we're trying to get Bill on, we have some questions from the audience at the Elaine Legacy Center. Should I read a few of those?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so one of the questions is, and these are from younger folks at the Elaine Legacy Center. All these states are passing laws against critical race theory and even other critical race events. How do we organize against this and teach it in other venues? So it's this question about this war against teaching about truth in U.S. history. Unless I know you're at a location right now where that's like job number one.
Yeah, I think we have some people who are in the audience who are all on board with this. I mean, I think the challenge that we face is enormous, and it's so exciting. I will say, I want to convey some of the enthusiasm of the K-12 teachers we're working with. We recruited people for this NEH Institute that are all leaders in their home school districts and have wide networks. And so it's been really exciting to see how they've come together in this sort of new McCarthy moment. Many of them have been sort of outed by right-wing media for signing this pledge on June 12th to teach the truth through the Zen Education Project. And so just coming together this past 2 weeks for the Institute, it's been really wonderful to see the power of teachers organizing and the reinforcement that they're giving one another on how to share the stories of youth organizing, as well as labor and environmental justice, indigenous organizing, the Black freedom struggle. So we've had lots of wonderful activists and scholars come join the Institute. But I think that simple example, whether it's in your home community or in institutes like this, where people can gather together and plan, right, and feel the incredible power of that solidarity, is so important. And especially in the first few months of the coming semester, when teachers are really feeling a lot of heat, particularly in states like Florida and Texas and Arizona, where a lot of the local news is really highlighting parents' resistance to their children being taught the truth about American history. Well, I don't know if you want to add to that.
We know Julia Wright put a wonderful message in the chat bar. I want to commend everyone's attention. And she has been circulating a petition about the need to really get folks nationally and internationally to understand histories of anti-Black violence, not just in the United States, but globally. And so she is circulating a petition about this issue. And our students at the Samuel Proctor Oral History program have been looking at the petition and signing it. And I just wanted to echo really what Wes was saying, and in the work that both of us do, since we've worked with Larry, and Larry really modeled this behavior. I mean, right now, our students are working intensively with the Elaine Legacy Center. We've been working with the Elaine Legacy Center for the past few years on really highlighting the stories of the descendants of the 1919 massacre, which when I was in college was known as a race riot. Imagine that, the incredible inaccuracy of that statement. No, it was an anti-Black pogrom. That's how Larry Goodwyn understood Chicago in 1919. That's how he understood Tulsa in 1921. And no mistake, no accident that Scott Ellsworth, who's one of our wonderful contributors to this volume, writes his dissertation about the Tulsa Massacre in the 1970s. Imagine that. A lot of people now are saying, hey, I just learned about the Tulsa Massacre. I watched this documentary on television. But people like Larry Goodwyn, Bill Chafe, and Peter Wood were talking about that massacre in the 1970s. And Scott Ellsworth wrote a wonderful book. The last thing I'll say about this is we're fighting back in Florida. Our unions are unionized. Every university on Florida, the faculty are unionized. We're fighting those anti-critical race theory bills and HB 233. And we're doing oral histories right now with as many people as we can, because as Larry taught that oral history was indispensable if you want to get to the truth of this nation's history, because the people who created the primary documents, most importantly, the people who preserve those documents and decide what gets saved and what doesn't get saved, have their own reasons for creating archives. And the archives, as they often exist, are archives about the status quo. And oral history is about trying to lift up the voices of oppressed people, people of color, working class people. Another contributor of this volume is Elaine, who studied with Larry as undergraduate, who went on to become a labor organizer, and then went back to school, wrote a wonderful dissertation about textile worker unions. And so that's what we try to do. If you think of Leslie's work, Lane's work, many of us here on the call today, is that oral history is a sacred calling to us. We believe that without using oral history, you're never going to get to the truth, because otherwise you're just accepting what people in power tell you is the truth.
So somebody in the chat was asking, how do we get involved at the local and state level to adopt curriculum at public schools? And I'm just going to put one thing in the chat from the Zen Education Project. Here in DC on June 12th, they started a big rally to support teachers to teach the truth. There's this wonderful legal scholar from NYU who has clarified that in our Supreme Court and in federal courts throughout the nation, there's sort of a Confederate narrative that's infiltrated the decision-making of many of the conservative jurists in the country. And I think that's true for schools as well. If you look at the way people are fighting the curriculum right now, it's because the struggle has moved from textbooks, which used to be controlled much more tightly, to this social media world where so many more resources, primary sources in particular, are available for teachers and students to use. And so into that mix, you have seen a lot of people, trying to pull back that authority of who gets to say what is taught to our young people. So I think that Zen Education Project pledge and organizing teachers and parents around that can be a really powerful counter to some of these laws that people are trying to pass, and in some states have passed at this point. Paul, somebody is asking in the chat, what organizations are we involved in? So I don't know if you want to take that first and then I'll go.
Well, right now, the big organization I'm involved with is the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And this is as Sheila Payne put in the chat bar earlier, you can click the link to find out more about us. This is our 14th annual trip to Mississippi and Arkansas Delta to really interview veterans of the civil rights movement, educators, contemporary organizers. And the other organization that I've been working with especially heavily in the local community, because Larry talked the importance of not just national organizing, but organize where you are. Don't just study something or get involved in something, halfway across the country, like organize where you are. And so one of the groups that I'm working with now is the Alachua County Labor Coalition. And you can read about our work. One of the struggles that we're involved in now is the struggle against evictions. This is a national crisis. Many lower income people are being evicted by landlords, many of them corporate landlords. And so we're in a fight right now to try to prevent a beautiful African-American working class community called Pine Ridge. We're trying to prevent 83 families from being evicted. The residents are doing the organizing, right? This is not a vanguard effort, but we're trying to provide as much support as we can and trying to get some of this federal pass-through money to go to working class African-American communities and not just to affluent middle class folks. So, but I would say the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, the Alachua County Labor Coalition are kind of two groups that I've been working with.
Yeah, and I'm hoping our contributors will put the kind of work that they're doing in the chat as well, because it's so helpful to see all of the different organizations that people are representing here. So Garbo, I don't know, can we unmute Danelle Baird? Is that possible? So Danelle was one of Larry's students in in the early part of the 21st century. And he's now leading this really exciting organization in New York City called Black Power. I'm just looking to now to see if you're, yeah.
And one of the questions was, while we're working on unmuting Danelle is, and these are questions that don't admit of easy answers. So these are kinds of questions I think we can take back to our communities with us. But this is signed from the people of Elaine, Arkansas. The question is the statement, when I read this book, how will it help us organize our community into action? And that is the central question that drove this entire book, right, Wes?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
well, go ahead, Danelle. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. I feel really privileged that we were able to gather, and the book looks amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Wesley. Thanks so much to Nell and Lauren and Wade and everybody. I am so excited to be listening in to the stories. My wife and I were chatting on the passages that Paul and Wesley both read. We're driving our kids to see his friends, but are just like so excited about the community that was built around this book and that Larry built. I mean, Wes, it was so great to hear you talk about some of Larry's quotes. Race is a central through line in American history. I remember something that he always used to tell me, which was, and I used to fucking hate it. Social knowledge is experiential, was what he always told me. Because I was a young 19-year-old, and I was very impatient, and he just wanted us to give ourselves permission to experience life, to learn, to make mistakes, to reflect, but still maintain that confidence that eventually we would get to a place by learning that we would be able to make contributions and become heavyweights ourselves. And like, if that's not the basis for like a democratic confidence, I don't know what is, right? Because everybody can have life experience and learn, whether you're quote unquote smart or educated or not. You can have life experience and learn from it, and then that experience is valuable. You can share that learned wisdom with everybody else. And for me, as I get older, I'm 40 now, so it's been 20 years since I met Larry, and he's still, other than my wife, the single most influential person in my life, in terms of how I think about the world and how I approach work and politics and life. I think one of the things that was really interesting about Larry for me was he always brought in the personal development aspect of me as an individual into conversations around my political development. And so from our very first conversation where he said I was the laziest motherfucking student that he'd ever met, and that I would die of a drug overdose within 5 years if I didn't get my act together. And then he just glared at me until I responded. And like Paul said, that's pretty provocative, but it was very bracing and it was honest, and it became the basis of, a really special 15-year relationship. He always used to tell the story of how we met, which is that I thought he was full of crap, and I told him so in front of a classroom full of 30 other students. And it just made him so happy that I told the entire class that I thought he was full of shit. Because in some ways it was a democratic exchange between a 19-year-old Black student from a low-income background and a very powerful history professor at an elite university at Duke. And it allowed him to model for the whole class who he was and what a democratic exchange looked like, which was, instead of reacting to me saying he's full of shit, he just went on to the next student. And it took me years and years to kind of understand why that story was so important to him, because I had to go through my own set of experiences and learn through my own, social knowledge why that story was so important to Larry. But it was non-hierarchical, and it was democratic on day one, and it allowed us to show all of his students taking his class what we were trying to accomplish in the course, where we could all get to a place where we had honest, real, authentic conversations and real exchanges. And that's hard to do. That's hard to do in your marriage. It's hard to do with your kids. It's hard to do at work. It's definitely hard to do in politics. It's definitely hard to do with your political opponents, especially when they're full of shit like most of the Republicans are right now, and just almost incorrigible. But I think that for me, Larry just added this like fourth or fifth dimension to American politics, and the way that he taught politics to me by reading Wesley's books and learning from the work that she was doing and that Hassan was doing, and being able to turn over politics and look at it from a wide variety of places. For me, I was really glad to be reminded by Wesley about the farmers cooperatives in the populist moment. Right now, what we're trying to get the Biden White House to do is to create neighborhood internet systems and neighborhood scale clean energy systems that low income and working people will own. And if we can have them own cooperatively, $5.5 trillion of infrastructure that gets invested by the Biden-Harris administration, or even we could get $500 billion, I'll take $500 billion. I think that's going to be a good basis for politics and for economic development of these communities. But that's, a direct lesson from Larry Goodwyn and the kind of special teaching and philosophy on politics and economics and life that he had. I was just really grateful to be a student and glad to be a part of this community, and happy to answer questions if I can stay unmuted, if that's helpful. Thanks, everybody.
Danelle, that was so inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your work today, as well as the work that inspired you about Larry. Paul, I'm kicking it back to you because it looks like we're up at the top of the hour.
Okay. Well, there's one, I was just handed a question from comrades of the Elaine Legacy Center, and their kind of question statement simply says research of land / property stealing, such as Tulsa Massacre and Elaine Massacre. How or who may help with this? And I think this body of people right now is a good place to start. We all know now what the Elaine Legacy Center is, and we have the contact information. I would encourage people to really see the community here in the Arkansas Delta and Phillips County is really the base of that struggle. And again, to kind of remind each other that it's oral history who really, it's oral historians, and not just people who Larry and Bill Chafe trained, but oral historians all across the country who are the ones that really ramped up our understanding of what happened here in places like Elaine, what happened in Accoy, Florida, what happened in Rosewood, Florida, because it was the oral narratives that clued us into the fact that African Americans in places like Elaine, Arkansas, were landowners, owned businesses, owned farms. Some of them may have been smaller farms, but they owned their farms. And at the end of that, these anti-Black pogroms, Black people didn't own farms in Phillips County. They were reduced to being sharecroppers. But it was oral historians who really found that data, found that evidence, and really highlighted it. So now it's kind of on us to really be in solidarity with people in Elaine and people in Tulsa and other places. But again, I just think, Larry Goodwyn's opening that he provided us, he said that the history of this country is a history of white supremacy. And Wes heard that. I know Danelle heard it. I know Lynn Wyndham heard it. Everyone who ever took his seminar with Larry Goodwyn he would say, the history of this country is history of white supremacy. And that was so important to us as scholar activists, because again, it created an opening for us to be critical about this country. That's what a lot of this book is about. It's about, let's be critical about ourselves, about the nation, because until we are so, we'll never be able to change.
So thank you so much again, everybody, for coming out today to celebrate with us. I want to thank Garbo. Thank you so much for having us and hosting us today. And we're so excited to see this book and all of its many flowers come to bloom. So I want to encourage everybody to share it with your friends and colleagues in your networks. And I want to thank again, Paul, for all of the tremendous organizing work that you have done to get us to this point. And really just share the excitement and enthusiasm we have. We need to absolutely use this moment to organize. We are in a sort of terrifying precipice
Ask him, can you
moment.
change the screen? Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Oh, hey,
All right.
yes.
So we had some technical difficulties because we're in the midst of a storm, but you know, this is the people's work. And the internet or no internet, thank you guys for carrying on. We do have a special book giveaway for the participants. If we can get our technical guy to get it on the screen, we're going to give away a book today because nothing can stop the people's work. So bear with us, but you will get, everyone that registered will get a copy of the presentation in or out. This has been great conversation. I want to thank you, Wesley and Paul, for continuing to carry on. It's been amazing. And let's see if we can get the screen up to give away the book.
And while Garbo is doing that, I just want to take this opportunity to thank her and to remind people, buy People Power from Pyramid Books. And Garbo has kindly is offering the book for sale at Pyramid, and you can order it wherever you are in the world. And well, at least in the US, right, Garbo?
You can order it from anywhere.
Free shipping.
We'll send you the link, and anybody, we will send it to
Okay.
you, free shipping. We'll ship it to you for free. So let's see who won the book. All right. Screen's got to go all the way around. Grant Smith. Is Grant one of the contributors? Yes.
No, he's not a contributor. He was at the book signing today.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Grant, we will be emailing you and making sure that you get your book. And again, Wesley and Paul, it's been an honor being in the bookstore to launch People Power. There's much work to do. And again, thank you, Julia, for being on the call and all the work that you do. So we're going to put up the screen of how to get the book, and it's been a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hey, Wes, great to see you. Great to see everyone.
So Wesley and Paul, don't hang up. I want to talk to you a little bit after everyone's gone, if you have a little time. All right.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. All right. That was crazy because the internet kept going on and off and the wind is blowing crazy. It's raining like crazy here. So did it ever completely go away for both of you? Unmute yourself, Wesley. Okay.
It stayed up. It stayed
up the whole time? Oh my goodness. So that was luck because we were the host. I'm not sure how you were able to do it because you weren't the host. You had some luck. And Paul, you kept going in and out, but you kept going. The program kept going. And I guess
yeah, Wes kept the ship on course, and we just Yeah, the Arkansas Delta right now is so unpredictable, right? But yeah, we
Yeah.
kept it going.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy in Arkansas. The bandwidth and internet connections throughout the state is so uneven based on our economics. So, depending on the neighborhood and where you are, it can be really crazy. So this is a problem across the United States in rural areas and in Black neighborhoods. We get the last and the least of the internet in terms of accessibility. So technology is not the same all over. So that's what's keeping us in a certain position. We've got to
Um,
ask for that.
Garbo, I'm not sure you heard Danell Baird, but he was talking about how important it is to have cooperatives owned by the people for both internet and solar power.
Mhm.
And that part of his initiative with Black Power right now, his organization is to get a $5 trillion component of the infrastructure bill specifically for that, for cooperatives where people own access to high bandwidth internet as well as, solar power,
Mhm.
electricity.
Exactly, because if you think about the infrastructure bill that's in before Congress today, it really doesn't address this problem of how communication is uneven. So
So true.
maybe that's your next book, perhaps.
That's definitely part of my next organizing. That's so true.
Right.
In North Carolina, we have, 100 counties
Exactly.
and wildly differing access for people to information economy.
Yeah. So we had 137 people sign
Garbo,
up.
what can we do to, yeah,
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
very cool. Garbo, I was just gonna ask what we can do to promote Pyramid books at this point. We can keep on, I mean, the Proctor program is a big social media. So if you'd like, if you have any social media advertisements, we can just promote those like daily.
Okay. Well, I'm going to send you the recording of today's program and this PowerPoint. So if you could share that, because again, we are going to go, offer free shipping on any order outside of Little Rock. So we can get these books out of here because we've got over 50 books and we can order more, how it works. Pretty much everybody on the call probably already has a book, wouldn't you say?
I don't know, because I think it doesn't get released until next week.
Oh, okay. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
So I really am disappointed that our internet did what it did, but thank you, Wesley, for
Yeah,
taking control and making it roll. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting and for sticking with it despite the crazy weather.
yeah, we weren't going anywhere, but if any of you, Wesley, you come to Arkansas, we can definitely do a signing. And Paul, I know you're going in another direction, but next time you come back, make Little Rock one of your.
Yeah,
I
thank
will,
you
I
so
promise.
much.
We'll be back. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
All right.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.